My name is Ezra Stews, and the story I'm about to share will challenge everything you thought you knew about faith, salvation, and the path to God's heart. For 42 years, I lived what many would consider the perfect life of devotion, following every rule, every tradition, with unwavering dedication. But one crisp autumn morning in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and everything I believed about salvation was turned upside down. In just 14 minutes and 20 seconds of clinical death, my entire understanding of faith was rewritten. Before I share my encounter with Jesus and the profound truth he revealed to me, you need to understand where I came from. I was born the third of 9 children in a traditional old order Amish family. Our farmhouse, built by my great-grandfather's hands, stood proudly among rolling fields of corn and wheat. Like generations before us, we lived without electricity, automobiles, or the modern conveniences that the English, our term for non-Amish people, take for granted. Every morning began before dawn, filled with honest labor, and every evening ended with family prayer and scripture reading. My father, Benjamin Stoltzfus, was a deacon in our church, a man of few words but deep conviction. His calloused hands and weathered face told the story of a life devoted to God through labor and service. My mother, Hannah, embodied the quiet strength Amish women are known for, rising before the rest of us to prepare breakfast, running the household with effortless grace, and teaching us the ways of our people through patient example. From my earliest memories, the Ordnung, our community's strict set of rules, shaped every aspect of my life. It wasn't just a list of do's and don'ts. It was the framework through which we understood our relationship with God. Each rule, each restriction, each carefully maintained tradition was seen as a stepping stone toward salvation. I remember sitting in our one-room schoolhouse, learning more than just reading and arithmetic. Our teacher, Brother Eli, would often remind us, "The world outside changes like the wind, but God's truth remains steady like the mountains." We took pride in our separation from modern society, seeing it as proof of our devotion. As I grew older, my commitment to our ways only deepened. While some of my peers struggled with the restrictions, I embraced them. When my best friend, Aaron, left the community during Rumspringa, our period of exploring the outside world before committing to baptism, I remained steadfast. His departure only strengthened my belief that I was on the right path. Now, I recognize that feeling for what it was, pride masquerading as righteousness. At 21, I was baptized into the church, making a lifelong commitment to the Ordnung. It was a moment of great pride for my family, especially my father. I can still see the tears in my mother's eyes as I emerged from the water. Now officially a member of the church and, as we firmly believed, securely on the path to salvation. 2 years later, I married Rebecca Yoder, the daughter of a well-respected family. Our wedding was exactly as it should be, simple, focused on God, and celebrated by the entire community. Together we built our life on a foundation of tradition and hard work. We raised 5 children, teaching them the same values and beliefs passed down through generations. Our farm thrived. We grew organic produce, raised dairy cows, and sold handcrafted furniture to English tourists. Every good harvest, every healthy child born, every success seemed to affirm that we were living rightly before God. But then there were the quiet moments, before dawn, after everyone had gone to bed, when doubts whispered in my mind, questions I dared not ask aloud. And then, one day, everything changed. Doubts would creep into my mind from time to time, but I always pushed them away, convinced they were temptations meant to be resisted. Whenever I met English Christians who spoke of a personal relationship with Jesus, I dismissed their words as emotional and ungrounded. We had something better, I thought, a proven path to God through strict obedience and separation from the world. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was October 15th, a perfect autumn morning in Lancaster County. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves, and a golden mist hovered over the fields as the sun began to rise. The maple trees lining our property had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, a quiet reminder of the changing season. A few years earlier, our bishop had reluctantly agreed that certain modern health practices were acceptable, so I had taken up jogging. It was my one small rebellion against tradition, though I justified it as good stewardship of the body God had given me. Every morning, before the real work of the day began, I would run along the quiet country roads connecting our farms. That morning, as I ran, I felt particularly at peace. Life was good. Our youngest son had just been accepted as an apprentice to one of the finest furniture makers in our community. Our oldest daughter was preparing for her wedding to a respectable young man from a neighboring district. The harvest had been abundant, and our business was thriving. By every measure we understood, God was pleased with us. I had just passed the Miller farm, about 2 miles into my usual route, when I felt the first warning signs. A tightness in my chest, subtle at first, easy to dismiss as exertion. The sun had just begun to peek over the horizon, streaking the sky with breathtaking shades of pink and orange. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, how it declared God's glory. Then the pain came. Sudden, crushing. Unlike anything I had ever felt, it was as if a massive vice had clamped down on my chest, squeezing tighter with every heartbeat. I tried to call out, but no sound came. The last thing I saw was the gravel road rushing toward me as my legs gave way. What happened next would shatter everything I had ever believed about God, salvation, and the true meaning of faith. But before I tell you about my encounter with Jesus and the overwhelming truth he revealed to me, you need to understand just how deeply our beliefs about salvation through works and tradition were woven into the fabric of our lives. In our community, salvation wasn't something we explicitly claimed to earn, but in practice, that's exactly how we lived. We believed that following the Ordnung, maintaining separation from the world, and upholding our traditions was the surest path to heaven. We saw ourselves as guardians of true Christianity, preserving the pure faith that had been corrupted by the modern world. Our simple dress, our horse-drawn buggies, our rejection of modern technology, these weren't just cultural preferences, they were spiritual necessities. Each rule followed, each tradition upheld, was another brick in the wall of our salvation. Looking back, I now see how this belief system created a quiet, unspoken pride within us. We viewed ourselves as more faithful, more obedient, more pleasing to God than others. When we saw English churches adapting to modern times, we shook our heads in disapproval, convinced that we had chosen the better path. Even our charity and good works, sincere and substantial as they were tinged with the belief that they somehow earned us favor with God. That morning, before my heart attack, I had been preparing to attend a church leadership meeting. The topic? Strengthening certain community restrictions to ensure we remained on the narrow path. I had no idea that in just a few short minutes, everything I believed about salvation would be turned upside down. The meeting that morning was meant to address concerns about our youth, about the small compromises, the creeping influences of the outside world, the quiet ways in which our traditions seem to be slipping. We saw it as a battle for the soul of our community. But looking back, I realized that beneath our fear of losing tradition was something deeper, something unspoken. The terror of discovering that we had built our spiritual house on sand. Yet, in His mercy, God was about to reveal a truth so powerful, so freeing, that it would transform not just my understanding of salvation, but my very experience of His love. In 14 minutes and 20 seconds of clinical death, Jesus Himself would show me the difference between religion and relationship, between striving and receiving, between the crushing weight of tradition and the lightness of grace. What happened next didn't just change my life, it sparked a quiet revolution of grace in our community, but not without a cost. Because the truth, as Jesus said, would set us free. But first, it would shatter everything we thought we knew about how to reach God's heart. The transition from life to death wasn't sudden. It felt like sinking slowly into deep water. The pain in my chest, once overwhelming, faded into a strange numbness. The gravel road beneath my cheek no longer felt cold or rough. Instead, it was as if I was being gently pulled away, layer by layer, from everything physical. Later, I would learn that an English neighbor, Martha Zimmerman, had found me collapsed on the roadside. She had been driving to her early shift at the local diner when she saw me. But in that moment, I wasn't aware of her as a person. I was simply watching. It was like I had been lifted into an invisible room above the scene, observing from a distance. I saw her car slow down, saw her rush toward my body, her hands shaking as she reached for her cell phone, a forbidden object in our world, but one that would save my life that day. Time became meaningless as I watched the paramedics arrive, their movements both urgent and slow, like a dream. I saw the chest compressions, the defibrillator shocks, heard the voices calling out unfamiliar medical terms. It felt surreal, like a scene from one of the English movies I had glimpsed through store windows while making deliveries in town. Except this wasn't fiction. This was happening. And then, the dark came. Not the soft, peaceful darkness of a summer night. Not even the deep, quiet blackness of our farmhouse on a moonless evening. This darkness had weight. It pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating like something alive. It felt ancient, absolute, as though I'd been plunged into the void that existed before God spoke the words, "Let there be light." And in that darkness, I became fully aware, more present, more awake than I had ever been in life. I had no physical body, yet every thought, every emotion felt magnified, sharpened to painful clarity. And with that clarity came a terrifying realization. I saw myself as I truly was. All my life, I had believed that my devotion, my strict adherence to the Ordnung, my separation from the world, my commitment to tradition, had been earning me favor with God. But now, in this place, I saw my own heart laid bare. Images of my life didn't just flash before me, they played out with perfect understanding of my hidden motives and unspoken pride. I saw myself at church, dressed in our plain Amish clothing, and felt again the quiet satisfaction of believing myself more holy than the English who drove past in their cars. I saw myself refusing modern farming equipment, priding myself on keeping things pure, all while judging my fellow Amish who had allowed small modern conveniences into their lives. I watched myself teaching my children the ways of our people and realized, with devastating clarity, that I had not been teaching them to trust in God's grace. I had been teaching them to trust in works. The weight of that revelation was crushing. Each memory brought a fresh wave of conviction, stripping away every illusion I had held about my faith. I had spent my life performing for God rather than walking with Him. The darkness around me seemed to respond, growing heavier, as if it were pressing in on the realization of my own spiritual poverty. I thought of the rich young ruler who had come to Jesus, confident in his religious obedience. "All these things I have kept from my youth," he had said, just as I had prided myself on keeping our traditions. Now, for the first time, I understood the sorrow in Jesus' response. The young man, like me, had followed the rules but missed the heart of God. A deep, dizzying sense of spiritual vertigo overtook me. Everything I had built my life upon, every certainty I had clung to, was crumbling beneath me. The walls of tradition and ritual that had defined my entire existence were dissolving, leaving me exposed in a way I had never known. I tried to pray, but the memorized prayers of a lifetime felt hollow in this place. I reached for scripture, but the verses slipped away like water through my fingers. The very faith I had dedicated my life to, the faith I thought would save me, offered no comfort here. The darkness pressed in deeper, carrying a terror unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the fear of death. I was already beyond that. It was the horrifying realization that I had built my life on a foundation that was now crumbling beneath me. I had believed I was on the narrow path to salvation, but had I merely been walking the well-worn trail of human tradition? Time no longer had meaning. What felt like years could have been seconds. I experienced something I can only describe as a complete unraveling of my religious identity. Every doctrine I had followed, every practice I had upheld, every tradition I had treasured, all of it was stripped away. And in the end, I was left with nothing but the raw, undeniable truth of who I really was before God. And who was I? Not the righteous man I had imagined. Not the exemplary Amish father or respected community leader I had taken pride in being. Instead, I saw myself as I truly was, a man who had chosen the shadow over the substance, the comfort of rules over the risk of genuine relationship with God. Just when the weight of this revelation seemed unbearable, when the darkness felt as though it would crush whatever was left of me, something changed. At first, it was subtle, a slight shift, a whisper of relief. Then, light, a tiny pinpoint in the vast void, no bigger than a spark. But it grew, not gradually, but suddenly, explosively, as if a door to another reality had been flung wide open. The light that poured in wasn't like any light I had ever seen. It wasn't just bright, it was alive. It carried within it the very essence of life and love. It penetrated every part of my being, illuminating corners of my soul I hadn't even known existed. Yet, for all its intensity, it didn't burn. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been, yet somehow always belonged. And then, I wasn't alone. I became aware of a presence. No, more than a presence, a person. Though I had no physical eyes, I saw him more clearly than I'd ever seen anything in my earthly life. Jesus. And in that moment, every preconception I had ever held about him melted away. He was nothing like the distant, judgmental figure I had imagined. Nor was he the softened, modernized Jesus I had sometimes accused the English churches of following. He was utterly holy, utterly other. His very presence radiated an authority that made every earthly power seem insignificant. And yet, he was also more personal, more present than anyone I had ever encountered. His eyes held a depth of love I had never imagined possible, and as I looked into them, I realized something astonishing. He didn't just love humanity, he loved me. Ezra Stutzman. Personally. It was a love that knew me completely, every failing, every hidden pride, every mixed motive, and yet it loved me anyway. Not the conditional love I had always imagined from God, the kind that depended on my performance or how well I followed the rules. No, this love existed before I ever did. It was deeper, wider, stronger than anything I could ever earn or deserve. The shame I had felt in the darkness did not vanish in his presence. If anything, I became even more aware of my shortcomings. But now, something else accompanied that shame. Hope. Not hope rooted in my own righteousness or religious efforts, but hope anchored in the love I saw in his eyes, in the grace that radiated from his very being. I fell to my knees, though I had no physical body. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't even a reaction. It was the only possible response. Everything in me recognized him as Lord, not because of what I'd been taught, not because of any tradition, but simply because of who he was. For the first time in my life, I understood what it truly meant to worship in spirit and in truth. The light around him began to shift. Colors I had never seen before, colors that carried meaning, emotion, even wisdom, moved like a living thing, creating patterns that spoke directly to my soul in a way words never could. And then he spoke my name. Ezra, just one word. Yet in it, I heard everything. Complete knowledge of who I was, total understanding of my struggles and fears, perfect love for my real, unpolished, imperfect self, gentle correction for where I had gone astray. His voice was unlike anything I had ever known, a voice that could command galaxies into existence, yet spoke to me with the tenderness of a closest friend. In the overwhelming reality of his presence, all my carefully constructed theological arguments dissolved. All my explanations, why we lived as we did, why we followed our traditions, why we separated ourselves from the world, felt meaningless now. In his presence, there was only truth, pure, unfiltered, life-altering truth. And what happened next would shake the very foundation of everything I had ever believed about salvation, grace, and what it truly meant to follow God. But before he spoke the words that would transform my understanding forever, I experienced something even deeper, a complete reordering of my spiritual reality. Everything I had thought I knew about God, faith, and salvation was about to be illuminated by the light of his truth, and nothing would ever be the same. In his presence, time stood still, yet flowed like a river. Every word he spoke carried a weight beyond language, piercing straight into my soul. And then he said, "You have sought me through rules and traditions, but you have not known me." The words weren't spoken in anger. There was no condemnation, only deep, aching sorrow, mingled with overwhelming love. "Your people have created many paths, believing they lead to me. But instead of bridges, they have often become barriers. I wanted to defend our ways. I wanted to explain how we had preserved the faith, how we had kept it pure through generations of careful obedience. But in his presence, my arguments felt hollow. Instead, I found myself asking the one question that burned in my soul. "Lord, have we been wrong all this time?" His response was both gentle and unshakable. "Not wrong in your desire to serve me, Ezra. Not wrong in your hunger for holiness or your wish to separate from worldliness, but wrong in believing that these external things could ever earn what I freely give." And then, he showed me something that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. I saw our community through his eyes, not just the outward peace and order that visitors admired, but the hidden burdens, the silent struggles. I saw children growing up believing they had to earn God's love through perfect behavior. I saw teenagers trapped between faith and fear, convinced that one mistake could cost them everything. He didn't condemn them. Instead, he let me see them. I watched as adults carried the crushing weight of trying to maintain every tradition flawlessly, their relationship with God reduced to a never-ending checklist of do's and don'ts. "Look deeper," he instructed, and suddenly I saw beneath the surface of our carefully ordered lives. I saw pride, the kind that fueled our separation from the world, convincing us that we were somehow holier because of it. I saw fear, a fear so deep that it had driven us to cling to tradition, afraid that without it we would lose our way. I saw subtle self-righteousness, how easy it had become to measure holiness by outward appearances rather than the condition of the heart. But I also saw something else. I saw genuine faith. I saw sincere devotion. I saw real love for God, often buried beneath layers of human tradition, but still there, still burning. "Your community's desire to live simply and avoid worldliness pleases me," Jesus continued. "But these should be expressions of love, not requirements for acceptance. They should flow from a relationship with me, not replace it. Then he showed me moments from my own life. I saw times when I had chosen rules over compassion, times when I had judged others harshly for minor infractions, while completely missing the weightier matters, justice, mercy, and faith. But he also showed me the moments when I had genuinely sought him, when my heart had reached for him, even through my misunderstandings. "Remember the Pharisees?" he asked. And suddenly I saw first-century Jerusalem. They too had believed that strict adherence to rules and traditions would earn them salvation. They too had separated themselves from others, believing this made them more holy. But what did I tell them? The words of Scripture came alive with new meaning. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. I felt torn, convicted, yet uncertain. "But Lord," I asked, searching for solid ground, "doesn't our separation from the world protect us from sin? Don't our traditions help us maintain purity?" His response was both gentle and profound. "Separation from worldliness is good, but you have often confused cultural separation with spiritual holiness. True holiness comes from being set apart for me, not from following man-made rules. The traditions themselves are not wrong, Ezra, but they must never become more important than love, more vital than grace, more central than me." Then he showed me something that broke my heart and filled it with hope. I saw how our focus on separation and tradition had sometimes become a barrier to sharing his love with others. We had been so determined to preserve our way of life that we had sometimes forgotten its very purpose, to draw closer to God and reflect his love to the world. "Your simple lifestyle can be a beautiful testimony," he said, "but only if it flows from love and grace, not from fear and pride. Your separation from worldliness can point others to me, but only if it's accompanied by genuine love for those who are different." Then, the conversation became even more personal. "Ezra," he said, "I am sending you back with a message, not to destroy your community's way of life, but to infuse it with new understanding. The outward forms can remain, but the heart must change. The traditions can continue, but they must be rooted in grace, not law." I felt a deep weight settle over me. "But Lord," I protested, knowing the resistance I would face. "How can I explain this to my family, to my community? They'll think I've lost my faith rather than found it more fully." His smile held both compassion and determination. "Some will listen, others will resist. But remember, I am with you always. Speak the truth in love. Share what you've seen and heard. Trust me to work in hearts, just as I have worked in yours." Then he gave me a vision of hope. I saw our community transformed, not by abandoning our way of life, but by infusing it with grace. I saw families still living simply, but free from the burden of trying to earn salvation. I saw young people choosing to stay, not from fear of punishment, but from genuine love for God and appreciation for their heritage. I saw our separation from the world becoming a testimony of love rather than a wall of exclusion. "Your people have preserved many good things," Jesus said. "The emphasis on community, the value of hard work, the desire for purity. These can be beautiful expressions of faith when they flow from grace, not obligation." Jesus' voice was steady, filled with both love and urgency. The problem comes when good things become ultimate things, when they replace me as the source of salvation. Then, he showed me specific moments I would face when I returned. Conversations with my family, discussions with church leaders, questions from young people searching for truth. For each one, he didn't just give me words to say. He gave me wisdom to share and love to demonstrate. Remember, he said, transformation comes not through condemnation, but through revelation. Share what you've seen of my heart. Let them see grace in action through your life. Some will be ready immediately. Others will need time. And some may never accept it. Love them all. The light around us intensified, and I knew our time was ending. Lord, I asked quickly, will I remember all of this? Will I have the courage to share it? His answer was both gentle and unwavering. You will remember what needs to be remembered, and my grace will be sufficient for you. Your strength will fail, but mine never will. Keep your eyes on me, not on the responses of others. Then came his final words, ones that burned themselves into my soul. Ezra, salvation is not earned through works, but received through faith. It's not about what you do, but about what I have already done. Share this truth with your people. Many are ready to hear it. The light became overwhelming, and then I was falling. The return to my body was jarring. Pain rushed in. The cold gravel dug into my skin. Urgent voices echoed above me. We've got a pulse, one paramedic shouted. The physical recovery took weeks, but the spiritual transformation, immediate, permanent. The first person I spoke to was Rebecca. She had rushed to the hospital the moment she heard. Through tears, I tried to explain what I had seen. It's not that our way of life is wrong, I told her, gripping her hand as the machines beeped around us. But we've let it become more important than the one it's supposed to honor. We've turned traditions into requirements for salvation when Jesus meant them to be expressions of love. To my surprise and gratitude, Rebecca listened. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I've always felt like something was missing, she admitted. I've tried so hard to be perfect, to do everything right, but it never felt like enough. I squeezed her hand, because it was never meant to be about our performance. The truth of Jesus' words poured out of me, like a river breaking through a dam. It's about his grace, his finished work, his love, not something we earn, but something we can only receive. As my strength returned, I began sharing my experience with others. Some, like Rebecca, were immediately receptive. They had felt the same burden, but never found the words to name it. They had wrestled with the pressure to perform, to maintain perfection, to measure faith in rules rather than relationship. Others, not so much. Skepticism, hostility, doubt. The bishop called a meeting, calling my words dangerous ideas. Some whispered that my experience was just the result of oxygen deprivation or medication. Others warned that if I kept talking, I could face shunning. But Jesus' words anchored me. His grace proved sufficient. Even in the face of resistance, I found myself filled with love for those who pushed back. I understood their fears. I had once shared them. Because when you've spent your whole life trying to earn salvation, the idea that it's simply given, free, unmerited, undeserved, can feel terrifying. But change was happening. Not in dramatic confrontations, not in sudden upheaval. Instead, it came quietly, through small, heartfelt conversations, through living examples of grace-based faith, through gentle challenges to legalism. And through it all, I held on to the truth that had been seared into my soul. Salvation was never about what we do. It's about what he has already done. Something incredible began to happen. Young people, who had been silently wrestling with doubt, found new hope in the realization that God's love wasn't tied to their perfect performance. Parents, who had once focused only on rules, began teaching their children about grace alongside tradition. Even some church leaders, after initial resistance, started to see the truth in what Jesus had shown me. We didn't abandon our lifestyle. We still live simply. We still work hard. We still separate ourselves from many aspects of modern life. But now, these choices flow from love and gratitude, not fear and obligation. They are expressions of faith, not requirements for salvation. But the most profound change, it's been in our hearts, including my own. The crushing weight of trying to earn God's favor through perfect obedience has been replaced by the joy of truly knowing Him. The fear of falling short of community standards has been transformed by the peace of understanding that His grace is sufficient. Today, 5 years later, our community is still evolving. We haven't lost our identity. We haven't abandoned our values, but we have found a new foundation for them, not in human traditions, but in God's grace. Some families have left, unable to accept these changes. Others have joined, drawn by the rare combination of simple living and genuine grace. I still think about those 14 minutes and 20 seconds, the time I was clinically dead. I think about the darkness that stripped away my religious pretenses. I think about the light that revealed God's heart. I think about Jesus' words and how they continue to change not just my life, but the lives of others who have ears to hear. The journey hasn't been easy. There have been costs to speaking this truth, strained relationships, questioned trust, lost comfort. But there have also been moments of incredible joy. I've watched people discover the freedom of Christ's grace for the first time. I've seen the light dawn in their eyes as they realize God's love isn't something to be earned. It's a gift to be received. And to you, reading this now, whether you're Amish, English, or from any other background, know this. God's grace is greater than any religious system, any set of rules, any human tradition. His love for you isn't based on what you do or don't do. It's based on what He has already done through Jesus Christ. The truth Jesus showed me that morning changed my life forever. Salvation isn't earned through works. It's received through faith. It's not about a performance. It's about His grace. And that grace is available to everyone, no matter your background, culture, or traditions. As I write these final words, the sun is rising over our farm, much like it did on that life-changing morning. But today, I don't feel the weight of trying to be good enough. I feel the lightness of knowing that in Christ, I already am. Not because of anything I've done, but because of everything He has done. This is my testimony. This is my story. But more than that, this is the truth about salvation that Jesus wanted me to share. It's not about rules. It's about relationship. It's not about performance. It's about grace. And that grace is available to you right now, just as it was to me on the extraordinary morning when I died, met Jesus, and learned the truth that set me free.